Lonely rancher found Apache girl, hanging on a tree with a sign. White, man don't forgive. Under the merciless sun of New Mexico, Calder Wyatt rode. With a slow, steady rhythm, dust lifting. With every step of his dun mare. He had been trailing a lost here for half a day, the prince gone soft in the cracked earth. The silence was almost wholly out here, broken only by the faint creak of leather, the thin whine of wind, and the distant cry of a hawk. Calder preferred it that way, alone, quiet, predictable. Then he heard it, so faint it might have been the wind, a sound like a breath that had forgotten how to breathe. He froze in the saddle, head tilting, heartbeat slowing. Came again, a whimper thin, sharp, like a thread about to snap. He swung down quickly, tying the reins to a dead limb. With his rifle slung across his back, he moved through scraggly junipers and boulders, until he reached a small clearing ringed with ancient cottonwoods. There, beneath the oldest tree, he saw her. She hung by the wrists, arms stretched overhead, her body slack as a broken doll. Her bare feet barely touched the dirt. Her skin was sun-dark, dust-caked, long black hair matted with sweat and blood. Her chest rose in shallow, erratic breaths. Alive, but only just. Calder's gaze climbed to the crude sign nailed to the trunk above her. Thick red paint, letters jagged and furious. White man, don't forgive. He stepped back before he realized it, while burning his throat. The air thickened, part warning, part curse. He scanned the ridgelines, the rocks. No movement, no sound. Only the wind combing through dead leaves like whispers. His hand found the knife at his belt. Christ, he muttered. What the hell did they do to you? The girl stirred weakly, head lolling forward, and he saw the raw burns where rope had chewed her skin. You hear me, girl? His voice came out hoarse. Nothing. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, softer now, boots crunching forward. Up close, her face was young, 18 maybe, high brow, strong jaw, cheeks sunken from thirst. Dried blood clung to her lip. The rope was twisted mesquite fiber, rough and ancient. Whoever tied it meant for her to suffer. He raised the blade, fingers trembling. That sign screamed at him, accusing him of things he'd never said, never done, and yet still making him guilty. But then she groaned, and the sound broke him. Hain't all of them, he whispered. I ain't that. The blade bit clean through the rope. She collapsed forward, and he caught her. Her body was hot, burning almost, light in his arms as if her bones had been taken. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, frightened, unfocused. Calder lowered her to the ground, one knee in the dust. He poured water on a cloth and touched it to her cracked lips. Easy now, he said. You're safe for the moment. She blinked once, then again, her hand clutching his sleeve with fragile strength. He glanced at the sign one last time, then at her. Pulling off his coat, he draped it over her shoulders. You got a name? Nothing. Guess we'll find one for you, he murmured. He lifted her again, cradling her like something not yet broken. But for now, you're with me. The sun was dipping low by the time Calder reached his ranch, a modest outpost clinging to the desert's edge, where the land never forgot violence. A lone windmill creaked by the fence line. The old barn sagged as if mourning. The house, one room with a loft, patched in places with rusted sheet metal, stood solid and honest like the man who built it. He eased her from the saddle and carried her inside, her forehead pressed against his chest, breathing shallow and dry like leaves skittering across stone. He laid her on the cot, unwrapping the coat gently. Her eyes opened briefly, dark, wide, distant, but they found him. Lantern light flickered over the walls as he filled a basin. Her legs were bruised, scraped, one ankle swollen, her wrists marked deep with rope burns like brands. I ain't gonna hurt you, he said. breaking the silence more than expecting an answer. He dipped the cloth into warm water, wrung it out. Taking her right foot in both hands, he lowered it into the basin. She flinched barely. He waited. When she didn't pull away, he began washing away the dust and blood, his movements slow, deliberate, as though handling something sacred. 2. The water in the basin clouded red and brown. Calder worked in silence, careful not to hold her gaze for long, though he felt it on him, like a blade drawn halfway, undecided whether to strike or fall. Her lips parted once, as if to speak, but no sound came. "Reckon you don't talk much," he muttered, not unkindly. "That's all right. Silence beats most things, most days." He finished one foot, then the other. She let him. When he was done, he wrapped them in clean strips of cloth, then set her feet gently atop a folded blanket. "You remind me of a river I used to camp by," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Dry most of the year, looked dead. But after the rains it ran fast and deep. Locals called it Quiet Snake. Don't know why. Just quiet." In the lamplight he studied her face. Cheekbones like ridge lines, lips cracked yet full, dark lashes tangled with sand. She was too young for this kind of pain, yet there was something ancient in her eyes, something that didn't flinch from suffering, only waited for it to pass. "I'll call you Lena," he said softly. "Just for now. You've got the look of an Elena." Quiet but strong. A slow blink. No protest. No nod. Just breath. Calder rose, hands still damp, and reached for a blanket. He tucked it around her shoulders. "If you're hungry, there's beans. Not much, but better than air." No reply. He pulled his bedroll toward the door. Tonight he'd sleep out by the barn. Give her space. It wasn't right for her to be watched by a stranger, especially one with blood in his past, and questions in his eyes. Before stepping out, he glanced back. She'd shifted slightly, eyes closed, lips still. The basin sat beside the cot, its water stained with the memory of what had been done to her. Outside, he emptied it into the thirsty ground. Inside, she dreamed of fire, of horses, of ropes cutting into the sky, and of hands, rough but gentle, washing the hurt away without asking for anything in return. The days that followed moved with the slow rhythm of desert life. But the silence inside the house was different now, thicker, charged with something just out of reach. Lena, as he still called her, ate when he brought food, though never much. She moved with care, posture tight, eyes alert, like an animal too long in a cage. She never spoke, but he caught her watching him. When she thought he wouldn't notice. At night, he gave her the cot and took the barn, rifle beside him. He told himself it was to give her space. The truth was harder. He was afraid. Not of her, but of what her presence meant. That sign on the tree still burned in his mind. "White men don't forgive." Whoever wrote it had meant for her to die slow, and they might still be coming. Three mornings later, he saw the boot print. Slightly smaller than his, fresher than his, angled toward the barn. Calder. By midday the next day, the rider came. Dust curled behind the chestnut as it closed the distance. The man atop it wore the blue and gold of the U.S. Cavalry. His rifle was holstered, his hat low, jaw rough with stubble. Calder stepped off the porch, one hand easy on his belt. The soldier reined in, squinting down. "You Calder Wyatt?" "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." The man drew a folded notice from his breast pocket, handing it down. "You seen this one?" Calder took it, already knowing what it would show. A crude sketch of a young Apache girl. Sharp eyes, long hair, the words stamped clear. Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward, $50,000. 3. Calder looked up slowly. Can't say I have. You sure? The soldier asked, leaning forward. Small, quiet, might be hurt, might be hiding. We think she was rescued or taken by someone near the Cottonwood Flats. Calder kept the paper a moment longer, then folded it neatly and handed it back. Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits, and a cow that won't mind. Lieutenant Graham's eyes narrowed. She's not just a runaway, Mr. Wyatt. She's part of a violent group. Savages. That sign they left. They mean it. Calder's jaw flexed. If I see anything, I'll send word. The soldier studied him for a long beat, then nodded once and turned his horse. See you do. Calder watched him ride until the dust swallowed him. Inside, Lena stood behind the curtain. She'd heard every word. She stared, still as stone. He stepped in, removed his hat, and rested it against the doorframe. They came looking, showed me a paper, said you're wanted. She didn't answer. I told them no. Her eyes narrowed. Confusion. Suspicion. I don't know what you did, Lena. Maybe someday you'll tell me. But out here a man makes choices. I made mine. He turned to the stove, pretending to stir the beans already cooked. Behind him, she shifted, a breath, no more. And in that thin movement, trust cracked the silence a little wider. The afternoon sun hung low, stretching shadows across the yard. The wind had softened. It was a strange day, too quiet, as if the desert were holding its breath. On the porch, Calder sharpened his knife. Steel on stone, slow and steady. He focused on the rhythm, letting it keep his thoughts from drifting to the woman inside or not sleeping inside. A sound broke the monotony. Footsteps on gravel. Too light for a horse, too human for a coyote. He looked up. Lena was outside, her first time beyond the threshold since he brought her here. Her bare feet touched the earth cautiously, as though testing if it would still hold her. The woven blanket from her cot hung around her shoulders, dragging behind like a second skin. She walked slowly, uneven but deliberate, toward the far end of the yard where the barn stood sentinel. Calder set the knife aside, staying still, not wanting to break the moment. She seemed smaller in the light, more fragile. Yet something in her step had shifted. This wasn't escape. It was reclamation. At the bare patch of dirt near the barn, swept clean by the wind, she knelt, carefully, reverently, and let the blanket slip to her elbows. With deliberate hands, she picked up a stick and began to draw in the dust. Only then did Calder rise. He crossed slowly, boots quiet, and stopped a few feet behind her. In the dirt she had etched a bird, wings stretched wide in flight, encircled by flames like a burning crown. The lines were bold and taut, alive with strain and purpose. For the bird in the drawing appeared alive and in agony, its wings angled upward as if attempting to escape the surrounding flames or ascend with them. Having witnessed the horrors of war and seen symbols of violence etched onto rifles and skin, Calder recognized this symbol as something older, a cry, a prayer. He knelt beside her, his voice low and respectful as he asked, "What's that?" Lena did not look up, her face still, her eyes fixed on the drawing. After a long silence, she spoke in a voice dry and cracked like a sun-baked riverbed. "Bird in fire. My people's sign." Calder remained silent, his gaze fixed on the image. With the stick, she tapped the center of the bird, explaining, "This was my father's, our family. We painted it on tents, carved it on bows, always flying, always fire." Calder could feel the tension in her body, the tightness in her jaw, as if she were bracing herself for what she was about to reveal. "Last spring," she continued, her voice trembling, "soldiers, white coats, came. They said we must move to a far, dry place with no food, no water. They called us danger." She paused, the stick in her hand shaking. We said no, we stay. We fight. Her voice thinned as she recounted the atrocity. They burned our camp, killed my mother, my 2 brothers, and the old ones burned inside the tent. Calder slowly clenched his fists, an old, angry feeling stirring in his chest. Lena continued her story, detailing her escape and subsequent capture. They found me, beat me, tied me, called me a thief, said I took a rifle. I didn't. For the first time, she turned and locked eyes with him, her voice filled with fury. I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong. The words echoed in the open air. After a moment of silence, Calder's voice came, low but certain. I believe you. Lena turned back to the dirt, dropped the stick, and her shoulders began to shake with silent tremors. The sobs that followed were raw and unfiltered. She curled forward, arms wrapped around her knees, her hair falling like a curtain as the overwhelming pain poured out. Calder stayed beside her, offering no empty words of comfort. Instead, he placed his hand in the dirt beside the flaming bird, a gesture of testimony rather than touch. She felt his support, and eventually her breathing slowed. Lifting her head, her face streaked with dirt and tears, she met his gaze without a shield. You can call me Lena, she whispered. Calder gave a small nod, his voice like gravel and wind. All right then, Lena it is. They sat together in silence as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, and the fire in the dirt faded, but its ashes, like the truth, remained. That night, the wind whistled low through the rafters of the house, a whisper like a ghost remembering its name. Calder sat by the fire, his boots off and shirt sleeves rolled, tending a pot of beans. Lena stood by the window, watching the night settle over the desert. The silence between them had transformed from a wall into something gentle, like a shared breath. Suddenly, she turned to him and asked, You want to know the truth? Calder looked up, his spoon pausing mid-stir, and nodded without a word. She walked slowly to the table and sat across from him, her voice quiet but clear. My father was a minor chief, she began. Our band was small, peaceful. We traded with settlers, even learned their god. She explained they had rules and wanted to live peacefully. A full winter ago, she continued, a white woman was found dead near our hunting ground. Her husband said it was us. Her fingers tensed as she clarified that he had killed her, but they were blamed anyway. Soldiers, ranchers, and townspeople came, seeking what they called justice. They burned our camp, shot my brothers while they slept, she said, swallowing hard. Her mother died holding prayer beads, and her father was left hanging from their council pole. They found Lena hiding in a hollow tree and took her knife, claiming she was planning revenge and was dangerous. They tied, questioned, and beat her before hanging her from the tree like bait. For who? Calder asked, his voice a low scrape. For the rest of us. For anyone still alive and angry. She then asked him why he cut her down. After a long moment, Calder explained that raiders, who were said to be Apache, had hit his ranch the previous spring. He had been out hunting and came back to find only ashes. He heard his 16-year-old sister crying in the barn but was too scared to go in and waited for help. She died before anyone arrived. Lena whispered, You saved me because you couldn't save her. Calder nodded. She then asked if he would have saved her if she had been white. Calder stood and walked around the table to face her. He gently cupped her chin in his calloused hand, his touch careful and measured. I don't love skin, he said. I love what breathes under it. Her eyes welled up, and she pressed her cheek into his palm. They leaned into each other and shared a quiet, hesitant kiss that grew fuller, as if they had both been holding their breath for too long. Later, they stood in the kitchen, their shadows moving as one on the wall. Outside, the desert wind calmed for the first time in days. 6. A change began inside, like a mending wound. The morning brought the wind back, gusting harder than usual and carrying the scent of sand and distant smoke. Calder felt a shift in his bones, recognizing the weight of an approaching storm, even if it arrived in boots instead of clouds. 3 days had passed since the kiss, and Lena had started to move more freely around the ranch. She helped with the animals, swept the floor, and even laughed softly once when Calder cursed a stubborn mule. But this fragile peace was thin. By noon, a trail of dust rose from the east, and Calder, with a tight jaw, stood by the fence with his rifle. 3 local men on horseback with rifles and old hats approached. Their leader, a man named Joe Prescott, wore a self-appointed tin badge. Prescott dismounted and confronted Calder, saying he heard he might be harboring someone don't belong. Calder calmly replied that a lot of things are heard that aren't true. Prescott spat, mentioning an Apache girl and a $50 reward. He stated that they intended to check inside just in case. When Calder asked if he had a warrant, Prescott scoffed, and the other men shifted, their hands near their weapons. Calder insisted that he was the only one living there, saying, "Ain't no girl, just ghosts and goats." Prescott stared for a moment, then gave a tight nod and warned that if he was lying, he would burn with her. They rode off without checking the house, but the message was clear. They would return with more men and less patience. That night, Calder sat by a fire behind the barn, the stars hidden by heavy clouds. In his hand was the crude wooden sign he had buried and since dug up. Though faded, the hateful words "white man, don't forgive" were still readable. After a long moment of staring at it, he stood and placed it among the kindling in the fire pit. He lit a match, and the flames slowly rose, consuming the words in orange and gold. The wood cracked and curled as if the hate itself was resisting death. Behind him he heard footsteps. It was Lena. She wore one of his old coats, which was too big for her with the sleeves rolled up twice. She stood silently beside him, her eyes on the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, showing a mix of mourning and freedom. "I should have burned it sooner," Calder said quietly. She did not answer him, but she moved closer, her shoulder touching his. She gripped his coat tighter. Her fingers knotted in the fabric and said softly, "Thank you." The words were simple but landed like something sacred. He looked down at her, his heart heavy and alive all at once. The fire burned low, and the wind slowed to a hush. For the first time since he cut her down, there was no sign of what had been written against her, only heat, smoke, and the weight of their new choice. The next morning was unnaturally still and windless. Calder rose early and packed biscuits, jerky, and water into his saddlebag. He felt the air around the ranch tighten, as though they were being watched. He had seen smoke on the horizon, too steady to be a campfire. Word had spread, and they were out of time. Lena stood by the fence, her hair braided back, wrapped in his coat. Her face was calm, but her eyes held questions. "We have to go," he said, tying the final strap on his pack. "Tonight," she nodded, already knowing. He told her about land south of the border, in the Sierra Madres, where Apaches might still live free. "We can make it if we ride hard," he said. Lena stepped closer and held his hand firmly. He looked down at her and, his voice barely a whisper, asked, "You'll come with me?" She pressed her forehead against his chest, her breath warm through his shirt, and answered, "I want to live. I want to live as your wife." Calder closed his eyes. That single sentence carried more weight than 1,000 promises. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in her hair as if it were the last thing keeping him grounded. By sundown, they were ready. With 2 horses saddled, the ranch was left behind. There was no note, no fire, no goodbye, just a quiet door swinging and a home turned to memory. They rode through the desert under the cover of the stars, the moonlight painting the ridges silver. Lena, a steady and practiced rider, leaned forward against her horse and simply followed, not asking what lay ahead. 10 miles from the border, the land opened into low scrub brush and stone cliffs. Calder constantly scanned the horizon, every shadow a threat. His gut tightened just before the shot came. A crack echoed across the plain, and Calder jerked in the saddle before collapsing sideways into the dirt. "Calder!" Lena screamed, leaping from her horse. He clutched his side, his shirt already soaked with blood. "Keep going," he rasped, but she screamed, "No!" Another shot whizzed past them, striking the rock behind. From the ridgeline, two figures appeared, rifles raised. Calder groaned, pulling himself up, and growled, "We have to move." Lena hooked her arm under his shoulder and tried to lift him. "Believe me," he said, "I won't." Through sheer will, they stumbled toward the nearby rocks, bullets cutting through the night. Calder's boots dragged, but he forced one step after another, his breathing wet and his vision blurred. They somehow reached a narrow, hidden pass between two cliffs. 8. Lena, half dragging and half carrying him, pulled him inside and pressed him against the stone wall, her own chest heaving. The shots faded behind them. The riders would not follow into the rocks, as it was too risky. In the shadow of the pass, Calder collapsed to his knees, blood dripping into the dust. He looked up at her, with both pain and wonder in his eyes, and said, "You said you wanted to be my wife." She knelt beside him, cupped his face, and answered, "I meant it." Even through the pain, his lips curved. "Then we better make it through this pass," he said. She nodded, and for the first time since they met, Lena prayed, not to the settlers' gods, but to the spirits of fire, wind, and survival. Love in this place was a gamble, and tonight they were betting everything. The scene shifts. Tent flaps rustled gently in a river breeze, and moonlight slipped through the seams like silver threads. Outside, crickets sang and water whispered over stones. Inside, Calder lay propped on blankets, his breathing slow but strong. The fever had passed. The worst was over. Lena, with a basin of cool water at her side, gently wiped his brow. He watched her through half-lidded eyes and murmured, "You always this bossy with your patience." She raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Only the ones too stubborn to die," she said. He chuckled, then winced, and she gently hushed him, placing a palm on his chest to steady him. The silence between them deepened, no longer awkward but full. Then, as the wind sighed outside, he spoke again. "Tell me something true," he said, his voice soft. "What's your real name?" Lena looked down, then reached for his hand and guided it to her chest, over her heart. "Ayana," she said. "It means peaceful river. My father gave it to me." Calder closed his eyes, letting the name settle within him like a prayer. When he opened them, there was warmth behind his weariness. "Ayana," he repeated, tasting the word. "You're the only peace I've ever known." She didn't cry this time. She only held his hand tighter. Months passed. A small, humble lodge of pine and hide stood by a river on the southern edge of the territory, where the border was blurred by mesquite groves and dry wind. In the shade of the awning, Ayana sat cross-legged, stitching a tiny white shirt. Her belly was gently rounded now, visible beneath her woven sash. Humming quietly, she worked the needle through the soft cotton, her fingers sure and calm. Beyond the lodge, Calder trained a young Mustang, murmuring low, patient, and firm commands. Every so often, he glanced back at her silhouette and smiled. The walls of their home held no trophies or portraits, only bundles of herbs, 2 books, and a child's blanket waiting to be finished. Ayana moved through it as the very breath of the place, present, grounding, and full of quiet life. One evening, she walked down to the river along the same path she had taken for months. 9. The river's current moved with a slow and certain grace. She stepped barefoot into the shallows, allowing the cool water to kiss her skin, and placed both hands over her belly. "Little one," she whispered, "your father, he didn't just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise." Behind her, the soft sound of footsteps on the grass announced Calder's arrival. He came to stand beside her, and their fingers entwined without a word. Together, they watched the river drift into the dusk, where the first stars began to blink into view. No one would have expected 2 hunted souls to find something like this. But somehow, in a world of scars and storms, they had created a quiet patch of earth where love had taken root. It was not the kind written in history books, but the kind that endures. And the river kept flowing, peaceful, like her name, like their life, like something finally, truly home. The current moved with a slow and certain grace. She stepped barefoot into the shallows, allowing the cool water to kiss her skin, and placed both hands over her belly. "Little one," she whispered, "your father, he didn't just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise." Behind her, the soft sound of footsteps on the grass announced Calder's arrival. He came to stand beside her, and their fingers entwined without a word. Together, they watched the river drift into the dusk, where the first stars began to blink into view. No one would have expected two hunted souls to find something like this. But somehow, in a world of scars and storms, they had created a quiet patch of earth where love had taken root. It was not the kind written in history books, but the kind that endures. And the river kept flowing, peaceful, like her name, like their life, like something finally, truly home.